So this is about life and matter coming from life. Omne vivum ex vivo. That's Latin for life comes from life. Everything is floating on the ocean of consciousness. Darwin, in his theory of evolution, says that everything comes from matter. He says that even within the womb, first there is something material which grows, and from that growth of matter, knowledge also gradually grows. In general terms, he thinks that consciousness comes out of matter. But the followers of the revealed truth do not believe in that. They say that consciousness is all in all, and everything is floating on the ocean of consciousness. That is subjective evolution. Darwin talks of objective evolution, but the Vedic scriptures say that everything comes under the category of subjective evolution. As Bishop Berkeley, one European philosopher, said, "It is not the mind is in the world, but the world is in the mind." Everything is floating in the plane of consciousness. Consciousness presupposes everything. And this was said by the Saivite President Acharya, the founder of Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mutt, which is an organization in India, in West Bengal, a spiritual organization. So we're starting here with this conception, and then we're going to kind of work our way from what modern science tells us is going on, and then we'll work our way back to that idea that consciousness and life are fundamental aspects of reality. So the origin of life story that most scientists would put forward is called abiogenesis, meaning that matter is fundamental and life and consciousness come from matter. Many origin of life scenarios center around Darwin's concept of a warm little pond, where molecules underwent reactions that led to the formation of prebiotic compounds like amino acids. Over time, these small prebiotic compounds would have undergone further reactions to produce more and more complex molecules. This eventually led to the formation of a molecule capable of information storage, replication, and random mutation. This is from Astrobiology at NASA on their website. Life as we know it requires RNA. Some scientists believe that RNA emerged directly from these reactive chemicals, nudged along by dynamic forces in the environment. Nucleotides, the building blocks of RNA, eventually formed, then joined together to make strands of RNA. Some stages in this process are still not well understood. Once RNA was made, some strands of it became enclosed within tiny vesicles formed by the spontaneous assembly of acids, lipids, into membranes, creating the first protocells. So here at the end, this last sentence is where matter somehow spontaneously becomes life, something living. And notice also that in both of these descriptions, like the last sentence here says, eventually led to the formation of a molecule capable of information storage, replication, and random mutation. So we have this idea of random mutation, not something that can be completely explained in a rational way, but we have to invoke randomness, something which goes beyond our rational capacity. And same thing here at the end, right? Within tiny vesicles formed by the spontaneous assembly of acids into membranes, creating the first protocells. So it's saying spontaneously, out of nowhere, it just happened somehow. And then they continue with, the logical progression of their explanation, but still there has to be this element of, we have no idea what happened, right? Spontaneous assembly, random mutation. These are details that we should hang on to.
Right, and it just can't be explained at the moment.
Yeah, but more than that, I think. But yes, they can't explain it, so they just have to invoke randomness.
Right.
And then we say here, so this is all according to materialists. This is the explanation. According to materialists, a stone produced a man to inquire about its origins and do what it can't do. Form a concept of itself, using man to mind its chore, and decided after all that I'm just a stone. Oh, what a bore. So this nice poem here was written by the serving director of the Princeton Bhaktivedanta Institute. His name is Bhakti Madhava Puri. And what he's saying, I think, is pretty straightforward, that matter turning into life, right? Matter is a concept that we're talking about. So we're saying that matter spontaneously turned into life, which has the capacity for consciousness, for intelligence, and then that intelligence created a concept or tried to reflect on its own concept of matter. So is that such a logical progression of things? And we're going to explore that farther. The order in which we come to know things and the order in which something comes to be. From the reader's perspective, a book is composed of alphabetical letters, but the book itself did not originate from these letters. Ultimately, it is from the ideas of the author that the letters of the book came to be. In the same way, the molecules of a biological organism are the result, not the origin of life. This is the difference between the order in which we come to know things, ordo cognoscendi, and the order in which something comes to be, ordo essendi. So now we're getting closer to this idea, and we'll see a quote later on in the presentation from one of the founders of quantum mechanics, Werner Heisenberg, that science doesn't reflect nature in itself. It reflects what we can say about nature. All it is what we can say about what we perceive with our senses. It can't say anything about what the thing we're observing is in itself. And what this quote here is pointing out is that in the same way, we observe a book, right? We pick up a book and we read it, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, until the end of the book. We read it straight through. And if we assume that the way that we interact with the book is the same exact way that the book came to be, we're actually going to be in ignorance. We're going to be making a mistake, because authors don't just write, okay, chapter 1, blah, 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 chapter 2, right? They might start with the last chapter. They might start midway through. Like, it's a very organic process writing a book. It doesn't just happen the way that we experience it. So this is pointing out the difference between the way something actually comes to be and the way in which we come to know about it. So in the same way, because when we look at the smallest aspect of an organism, molecules and atoms, electrons, protons, neutrons, right, quarks, leptons, all that, we can't assume that because that's the smallest level that we perceive with our senses, that is how it's coming to be. We have to be very careful to recognize the distinction between how we come to know things and how they come to be. And again, that quote was said by the director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, Bhakti Madhava Puri. Another point here is that wholes come from wholes. Living entities come from other living entities, and they develop as a whole. The parts of a human being, the heart, brain, lungs, arms, legs, etc., develop together in an interconnected and basically codependent manner. It is not that each of these body parts develops separately and are then assembled, such as with a machine. The machine metaphor, mechanical systems, is not applicable to living entities, biological systems. In mechanical systems, the whole is equal to the sum of the parts. In a biological system, however, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So we can easily understand that with any machine, any mechanical apparatus, any tool, right, you build the part and then you put the parts together and you have a machine, and you could just as easily take the parts again, take them apart, rebuild the machine, right? That's mechanical logic. And many people put that logic and say that that's how life operates. But we can clearly understand from even what I'm showing here, these pictures and this little slide, the video, that an organism develops only as a whole. It doesn't, develop an arm and a leg and somehow they just like merge together, right? It starts as an embryo and it grows together until we get something like on the left here, a baby mouse. And again, it's not a machine, right? If you take the head of the mouse off and you take the heart out and then you try to put it back together, right? Clearly what you started with will be different from what you get, because you'll have a live mouse and then you'll have a dead mouse. So we need to be very clear about this distinction between the logic of mechanisms and the logic of life. Is life coming from matter absurd? Have we ever observed a living entity coming from something lifeless? And the answer is certainly not. There has been no lab ever in the history of the world, all the scientists, all the labs, all the science put together, never has created life from non-life. It's never been done, ever. Even the smallest blade of grass, which nature is producing so profusely. You cannot make a blade of grass in the lab. You can make turf grass, like all these things that aren't really alive. Okay, you can even clone things, no problem. But you have to start with life that comes from nature, like life that was produced only from another life. So a similar principle of like coming from like, life from life, may be considered with the metaphor of a candle, which only gets its flame from another flame. The candle itself cannot spontaneously ignite. Similarly, matter has never been observed spontaneously becoming alive. In this relation, we can also talk about Louis Pasteur's experiment, where he disproved spontaneous generation by putting two pieces of raw meat. One was just exposed to the elements, and then one was inside a swan neck flask. So it was like all zigzag. This way, whatever things in the environment that may interact with the meat couldn't interact with it. So it was isolated inside a flask. And both of the pieces were wrapped in gauze. And the reason he did this experiment was because at that time, people thought that little gnats, little flies, would literally spontaneously just like grow out of the meat. So he did this experiment to show, no, that's not how life works. So of course, the piece of meat that was outside of the flask, the little gnats would come, and the piece of meat that was inside the flask, nothing happened. So they could understand that something in the environment, meaning, small flies coming and laying eggs, that's why little flies would come off the meat. So it's a similar principle about they're thinking that life can just spontaneously come from non-life, and that's not how it works. So now the origin of life, the concept called biogenesis, that life comes from life. Omnicellula, acellula. All cells come from cells. This was something talked about by Rudolf Virchow, who's known as the father of modern pathology. Here in this video, we see mitosis. We see one cell, and then a cell is alive. A cell is living. And then more cells only come from a living cell. It has to be alive. A dead cell can't produce more cells. It can't undergo mitosis. It has to be alive for another life to come. So this omnis cellula acellula demonstrates the empirical truth that omni vivum ex vivo. All life comes from life. Life and matter coming from life is an empirical truth. Every day, we observe living beings only coming from other living beings, cells from other living cells, children from living mothers, etc. We can see that with the kangaroo. That's why we have the kangaroos here. It's a nice example, very visual. And we see that matter is generated from life also. So not only we're saying that life is coming from life, but matter itself is coming from life. Our hair grows on living bodies only, right? On a dead body, hair stops growing. The body has to be alive for matter, hair, to generate. Same thing with nails, right? When a body dies, eventually the nails stop growing also. But when it's alive for 100 years, you're going to have nails continually growing for 100 years. So where is that matter coming from? It's coming from that life. We also see a tiny living seed generate matter to become huge redwoods. But if you kill the seed before planting it, then no matter will come, right? It's pretty amazing if you think about it. A seed is so small, but it's alive. It has life. And you put it in the ground, and it has the favorable environmental conditions, And that life generates matter to grow and grow. And in the case of redwoods, right, become these massive things that are like, where did that come from? Where did all that matter come from? It came from life. But again, if you put the seed in the toaster oven first, and then you try to plant it and you water it, give it sunshine, all the love you need, nope, nothing is going to happen because it's not alive. Life and matter also is only coming from life. In this little video on the left, we see it, right? It's a time-lapse photo. You see how the matter is just, it's coming out of the life. So matter is a concept. We have two quotes here. One is from Carl Jung. Matter is a hypothesis. When you say matter, you are really creating a symbol for something unknown, which may just as well be spirit or anything else. It may even be God. Werner Heisenberg, I mentioned this before. He says that we cannot disregard the fact that natural science is formed by men. Natural science does not simply describe and explain nature. It is part of the interplay between nature and ourselves. It describes nature as exposed to our method of questioning. This was a possibility of which Descartes could not have thought. So this part about Descartes at the end is explained a little bit more on that slideshow that I sent you about the harmony of the sciences and humanities, because Descartes' philosophy is one that really got this idea into people's head that things that are extended in space are different from the mind. That mind and matter are not unified, that they're separate. And you know, that other presentation goes into a little bit more why that's not what we experience, and that's probably not the case. We can also talk more about that at some other time if you'd like. So to conclude, life and consciousness are fundamental principles of reality. Matter, life, and consciousness itself are all concepts. They are all thoughts. Before we can say anything about our empirical observations of nature, we must conceive. Saying I am, or that is a rock, is more truly expressed, I think that I am, or I think that is a rock. All experienced reality passes through our consciousness first. It's not that the material world is given. It's not just there, but we think it is there. The world cannot be separated from our consciousness of it. Attempts to separate the world from consciousness are sometimes called the myth of the given. So consciousness is a symptom of life. Only living entities demonstrate conscious behavior. Thus, it is rational to conclude that life and consciousness are the fundamental principles of reality, which returns back to that initial slide that we had, right? Everything is floating in the plane of consciousness. Consciousness presupposes everything. So, any feedback would be much appreciated.
Yes. I agreed. I mean, it's kind of like, for me, it's a case open and shut. Yes. What really attracted me to joining this club is the study of consciousness and the myth. What was that? The myth of
The given.
The myth of the given. I read a lot of Carl Jung. I am almost finished his last book he ever wrote, Man and His Symbols. And yeah, he's my favorite psychologist because he, towards the end of his life, was really open to how science is just, it really is just parts of a whole. We just haven't even begun to really, we need to bring it together. He even says on the last part of his section of the book that if he could do it his whole life over again, his career, he would study much more deeply consciousness in a more philosophical realm a little less rigid on the scientific end. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, science itself, right? Modern science, modern empirical science.
Yeah,
And I
less
talked about
empirically.
it came out of what's called natural philosophy, right?
Mhm.
So, you know, Aristotle, Plato, so many others, even like Rene
Agreed.
Descartes, uh, Sir Isaac Newton. These were all natural philosophers. They were after the truth of reality,
Mhm.
and they were coming from not only a philosophical background and a philosophical process, but religious. They were all theists. They all believed in God, and that God was fundamental to a scientific endeavor. That science was to, like, there's one quote, I forget who said this, but that science was part of the process of glorifying God, coming to see what is the truth of nature, how does nature operate, and is to see the glories of God. One of the philosophers said like that.
I was just gonna make a comment too, though, on that portion of the quote on the book, writing a book. It doesn't just write itself. There's consciousness behind it. We're not just reading something that came out of the air. Just before our meeting here, I write music. One of my interests in the study of consciousness is how music. I have like a psychology of music textbook I've been like really getting into to see where the creation of music explains consciousness in its own way. And I was just finishing a song. I'm recording a song, and I've been like working on it like day in and day out, just changing the composition a lot. And it reminded me of that quote with the book is like a full song, a full book can be started at the end, and the listener later on will not even know it. They're not going to see all of the thought and intention that was put into the whole process of that complete piece or project.
For
So
sure.
it resonated with what I've been experiencing lately.
That's awesome, for sure. And I can see why you're interested in this harmony of science and religion, because you can understand that it's something that we can experience directly. Science is not just for somebody who knows the proper terminology and who has memorized the script, right? Science is supposed to be like truth. We're perceiving truth. So that is something that's perceptible to everybody. Science is supposed to be the empirical approach towards truth. So that means that we should be able to see it. We should be able to directly experience it. So if some of these based presumptions, such as matter is fundamental to life and consciousness, is not empirically observable at all, then we have to question that.
Yes.
Like, seriously.
Like consciousness is, I think, my aim of study in psychology, just how the mind and consciousness are, like mind and matter are connected. I have a lot of like health stuff going on physically, and I think a lot of it, I don't like that how like Western medicine ignores. I think that science or mind and matter not being seen as connected is what makes our health system here very like all over the place and not really helpful
For
in
sure.
the end.
Yeah, that's a great observation.
Yeah.
One of the leaders in our institute, his name is Bhakti Nishkam Shanta. I learned this from him, that he's also a PhD scientist background from IIT, one of the leading universities in India. And he explained to me that the drugs that, the pills that we give to the body, because they treat the cell like a mechanism, so the pill gives some kind of a structure to the cell. And they say, the body is a machine, the cells are essentially a machine, so we know how the cell will react with this structure we're giving it. And that means, if we give you this medicine for a cough, your cough will be healed, etc., for all kinds of illnesses. But life has the tendency for spontaneous activity, right? When you throw a paper airplane, you can use physics and math, and you can actually tell where the paper airplane will go. But when you have a little bird in your hand and you open your hand, you have no idea where it's going to fly, because it has its own consciousness and it can spontaneously go wherever it wants to go. So similarly, the cell is alive. It can do whatever it wants to do. So when you give it this little structure, it can do whatever it wants with it. It doesn't have to do what you think it's going to do with it. And that wiggle room where the cell has the ability to do something spontaneous that you don't expect it to do is where that whole list of side effects come from on drugs.
Yeah.
because you overlook the spontaneous activity of life. You think it's a machine, but it's not. So you're absolutely right, I think.
And like healing the root cause of a disease, I think that, with these pills, these medications can for sure help, fine. But because it is internal, I do think that I've read cases, I've watched some documentaries where like it's just to heal the root causes of a lot of disease. It's conscious. It's you can think that's more powerful than your medication. It can aid it or it can heal, I think, much more powerfully than these medications.
Yeah.
So that's where.
Yeah, we're definitely not saying that the medicines are useless or anything like that. They definitely have their use, but because they're coming from a system that overlooks the fact of the matter, essentially, they overlook that, so it just doesn't, it causes problems in a very simple way. I was going to suggest, are you a reader? You seem like you're a reader if you're reading psychology of music, right?
Yeah, I love to read, yeah.
There's, I have a PDF of this book by our serving director.
Oh, okay.
And it's all about consciousness and science and religion. And if you like, I can send you the PDF of the book.
Please.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
I saw it I checked out the website. So that's who wrote that?
This is Bhaktimadava Puri.
Okay.
Yes.
What are we going to be going over next time?
Well, we can be open for suggestions, and I have some ideas, but I haven't decided on anything personally. So maybe if we want to collaboratively come up with something, I can also take some. I'll go back to our serving director, Bhaktimadava Puri, and ask him what he thinks. And we're doing this in a very connected way. He's going to be a part of this also, as far as helping to guide what we talk about based on like the video. He's going to see the video and he's going to help give his input, and that's the most valuable thing. He's been doing this for a long time. He in 1976 the Bhaktivedanta Institute was established, and he was one of the founding charter members of the institute. And now there's many different wings of that institute, the Bhaktivedanta Institute, and our wing in Princeton, started by him, opened up in 2012. But he's been working in this area of consciousness studies and the harmony of science and religion since the mid-70s. So he is a heaven sent, for this, guiding this kind of activity.
I saw that there was a temple that they built in Princeton. Like it's new. Is that already built, or is that planned to be built?
Yes, planned.
Okay.
Yeah, we have an office.
Really beautiful, like the image that was there.
Yeah, that's right now is a concept, but we have an office that we meet at every Sunday, And also on Saturday, we have a class with Bhakti Madhavapuri via Zoom. And if you wanted to attend that, you're more than welcome. I can send you the information on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one last thing,
Yeah.
I saw yoga, that there was a yoga that he does,
Bhakti Yoga.
Bhakti yoga.
Yes.
Is that on Saturdays too?
Yes. Bhakti, it's a Bhakti Yoga class on Zoom, but
I see.
this
Okay.
kind of yoga isn't like the poses.
Mhm.
It's
It's more meditative.
definitely, it's like a mantra meditation is a big part of Bhakti Yoga, and
Okay.
there's a lot to it. And it's coming on Saturday. If you wanted to learn more about that, it would definitely be the place to go.
Would I be able to just jump right in, or would it be like, could I just observe the
Yeah,
first
you
couple
can definitely
times?
observe.
Okay, I'll
Yeah,
probably just observe, but
yeah, and
yeah.
ask questions. Definitely, you can ask any questions at any time, and
Okay,
yeah, for sure.
great.
All right. Well, it was very nice to meet you, Amanda, and I look
Mhm.
forward to continuing with this. And Lydia, thank you for coming. It was also very nice to meet you.
Yeah, it was nice to see you guys again too. I'll see you at the next meeting.
Great.
Okay.
Take care.
All right. Take care, guys. Good day.
You too.